everyone. I hope you're enjoying .next. My name is Mark. I'm really glad to be here to talk about GraphQL, and I'm here with Max as well.
Hi, guys.
And I think we're gonna have some quite interesting 60 minutes together. Spend some time together about GraphQL. It would be great if we were there in presence. Unfortunately, we still have this kind of a barrier between us that we have to deal with. Hopefully next year. It's the second year that I actually say hopefully next year we will see. We will be in presence. But yeah, I really miss the interactivity that you have during these talks, and that's it.
I even noticed that we use the same pictures from, I think it's .next 2019, the last one in presence.
Exactly. That was an amazing experience. It was my first time in Moscow. Now I'm connecting from London, so it's just about lunchtime for me now. It was such a great experience to be there in Moscow a couple of years ago, and the possibilities of networking that you get when you're doing these conferences in presence is absolutely something you can't reach from remote. I mean, even though you guys can feel free to write me at my references on Twitter or by email. I will share my contact details during the presentation. But it's amazing when we are in person, we can share our experiences, and this networking it's something that is really lacking in the past months. What's your experience, Max? What do you think about the current way of delivering talks or doing conferences in remote? I mean, do you enjoy it more, or is it?
Well, I'm getting used to it. For the first time when I participated in DC, it was like, okay, I'm going to go to Oslo, and it was 2020, and it appeared that no, I'm not going to go anywhere. So I was presenting from my office, actually. And I think it's good that we have at least one person to assist the speaker, because that's what I was lacking during NDC talk. It was quite complicated to talk with my laptop. So at least we have this option, and hopefully next year. I hope so. I told exactly the same thing last year, but we have vaccines at least, so people please go and get vaccinated. I think it's just the only option how we can beat this thing. But anyway, I think that we are quite short on time based on you just told me before the talk. So let's go ahead, actually.
Okay, is my screen visible?
I can see it.
Fantastic. Okay, fantastic. So guys, I'm really excited about doing this talk about GraphQL and ASP.NET Core, because I've been using the GraphQL with the Microsoft stack in the past 2-3 projects I've done with my clients, and I think that it's becoming really, really mature to be used in production. And so I'm really happy to share my experiences with you. So as I said, my name is Marco. I've been a Microsoft MVP for the last 12 years, and these are my email address and my Twitter account. So feel free to write me either here or in the Telegram chat. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Right, so what are we going to talk about today? Today we're going to have a look at how GraphQL brings advantages to us when we're building our service layer compared to perhaps what we could do with the REST, and or perhaps how we can combine the two things together. We're going to see how we can run GraphQL on ASP.NET Core. We will also have a glimpse of a GraphQL from the client side. I'm going to be using Blazor in this case, but most of the concepts that we will see will apply to any other C# based technology. So, for example, if you're consuming services from a console app, but also, they are also pretty much valid for a JavaScript client. So I think it's useful to have that point of view as well. And pretty much the entire talk will be focused on lots of the features that we have in GraphQL, like querying, manipulations, sending notifications, etc. So I think it's going to be quite a journey, and I hope you will find it interesting. So let's start by asking ourselves, why should I consider GraphQL for my next project? And in order to explain that, let me start with a very trivial example. So let's assume that I have a simple service that can manage two entities, right? A share and the industry. So shares with values, and there's also a many-to-one relationship to the industry entity. Even with such a simple model, I still need to create a number of different endpoints. So, for example, I need an endpoint for the industries. I need an endpoint to retrieve the shares, or perhaps to retrieve a share by ID. If I want to provide some search or pagination capability, I need to explicitly provide these parameters in my query string, plus the evident endpoints here to manipulate my data set. How is this different in the GraphQL context? In GraphQL, what we have is something like this, right? In which, well, we only have one endpoint, but that's not a big deal. I mean, probably the biggest advantage is that we have an incredibly flexible query language that we can use from the client to ask for exactly what I want to receive from the server. Let me give you an example of this. So let's move to the next slide. And yeah, here, as you can see, I can start creating a query. I can call it my query, right? And I can say that, yeah, I want to retrieve a list of shares. And for each of the shares, I want only these fields, all right? This is one first big advantage that we have compared to REST, where the return type is fixed, right? And often we need to provide, for example, a share DTO with just a minimum set of fields for searches, and perhaps a full share object for a get by ID kind of endpoint. Here, it's the client that, on a case-by-case basis, can select only the properties that it will need, and this will obviously also optimize the amount of data that is transferred over the wire. If I need to do some pagination, I can ask for the total count of items that I have in my query, in my database, sorry. Or I can set some where condition, an order condition, and things like that. So there's a big flexibility from the client-side perspective compared to what we can normally do with REST. Now, I know that you guys will think, okay, I could do something very similar to this with the OData as well. And OData has been there for ages. Yes, you're right. We will see during the presentation that with GraphQL, there's a lot more than just querying. So this is just the beginning. Just a few words. So we've understood that the GraphQL is pretty much a query language. It's a specification for a query language. And it was internally developed by Facebook almost 10 years ago, but then it has been donated to the GraphQL Foundation in 2015. So it's free. You can use it. The specs are available in GitHub. And it's built to be transport level agnostic. 99% of the times you will be using it on HTTP and perhaps WebSockets. But potentially you could use it with gRPC as well. It has lots of built-in functionalities in the language itself, like querying, manipulation, caching, subscriptions, support for microservices via things such as schema stitching and federation. We will have a look at all these things during the talk. From the technology point of view, it's absolutely cross-technology. If you go to the official website of the GraphQL Foundation, you will see a page like this one where there's a recap of all the technologies and the libraries for each one of them that you can use for your GraphQL project. So there's a JavaScript, Scala, there's a Ruby, Python, etc. And there's also .NET, right? .NET. For .NET specifically, right, there are two main libraries available. One is called the GraphQL for .NET, which is the official library from the GraphQL Foundation. And the other one is a set of tools from a company called Chili Cream, right? The Chili Cream GraphQL platform. And The founder of this company, Michael Stabe, has done a talk in 2019 at .next, presenting this set of tools. And for me, it's absolutely the framework of choice if you want to use a GraphQL in .NET in production. This is because apart from this being a really great set of libraries, the company, the guys are incredibly responsive. Should you have any issues or any questions, just pop up into their Slack channels, and they will answer any questions that you need. So again, I decided to do this talk after a few production cases with GraphQL, and I really feel that I can recommend this library for your production products, right? Cool. So let's start and switch. Let's switch 1 second to Visual Studio and start experimenting with GraphQL and trying to understand a bit more of what we can do with it. So I have a solution here in Visual Studio where I've added a project, a GQL demo server, which is basically, it's very, I've started from an empty ASP.NET Core project here. And I need to switch to this branch here, sorry. And I have referenced basically these two packages from the Hot Chocolate suite, right? Hot Chocolate is the server part of the Hot Chili Cream GraphQL library, right? Once you do that, you can go to your startup project and your startup class, sorry, and add the GraphQL server to the IOC container. And here you can define some options. You can, for example, say that you want to support filtering, sorting, and perhaps, you can reference a query like this one. We will see what this query looks like in a second. After that, you typically register an endpoint here with this map GraphQL. This is by default exposed on, sorry, it's a bit transparent here, under the graph/GraphQL endpoint, but this is something that you can definitely customize together with a number of other options. So I mentioned this query here, right? And how does a query look like in Hot Chocolate? Well, it's basically just a class. You can think of it like a sort of counterpart of a controller, in which I have built a method like this one, get all shares, which returns an enumerable of shares. These are hard-coded here in the code for now. I've set a name for this query to be called share, and I've said that I want to use pagination, filtering, and sorting. The orders of these attribute matters, but I'm happy to discuss this more in depth during the panel that we have later on. For now, let's just do Control F5 and try to run this application and see what happens. Right? If I go now to the /GraphQL, I get prompted with this playground here that I can use to experiment with my queries. This obviously can be disabled if you want to go to production, just to not expose these details to your users. So how does it look like? Well, the first thing is that if I go and have a look at the schema reference here, as you can see, there's a schema which is very well defined that represents my query, right? So for example, I have a shares query here, and this has a property called nodes, which is an array of share, and each share comes with a number of objects, right? A number of properties, sorry, and also references to other objects. So this means that GraphQL is strongly typed, and you can have a glimpse of this even just by typing your query, because you have also a sort of intelligence here. So for example, as you can see, I'm requesting a shares query. On the shares, I want to retrieve, I don't know, the company name and the value, for example, right? I hit run, and this query is executed against my my server, and here's the result. I have some other examples of these queries, right? So for example, I can add a sort of a where condition here. All the shares where the value is greater than 50. And as you can see, without doing anything, the framework already supports this scenario. It can apply the where link condition to my to the IEnumerable that I'm returning here, as we would expect. I can specify parameters in my query if I don't want to use hard-coded values, right? So here, for example, I'm setting that I have an industry parameter in this query, which is then used in this where condition. And yeah, this parameter is specified here in the variables. I run this query, and obviously it works. I can, thanks to this playground called banana cake pop, I can also inspect, for example, the request body, and I can see how the query is basically passed in this way. And yeah, the parameters are included in the body of the request. And I can also define things such as fragments, right? So which are pretty much like DTOs, right? So instead of specifying each and every time what a share looks like, I can say, yeah, a share is made of these properties, right? So it's company name, a value, and then there's an industry, which is this other fragment, which is just the industry name, right? I can go launch this query, and I get the result set that I have requested to the server, right? So what we got so far, the great amount of flexibility that I have thanks to this query language when querying my server. However, I kind of hear you, even from London, this is not that interesting so far because I'm using hard-coded values. So how does a hot chocolate work when we need to interact with a proper database? So in order to show this to you, I need to switch this other branch, right, in which I've added this additional library here, hot chocolate data entity framework. Let me just stop the server for now. And the difference in the startup class is just that I've registered an entity framework DB context, which is my context. We're gonna have a look at that in a second, in my IOC container. There's one important bit. This is not, I bet that this is not the typical way you register a DB context in your applications. But since GraphQL since Hot Chocolate has the capability of running multiple queries for the same user in parallel for the same request, unfortunately, a single DB context instance is not enough, and you need to create instead a pooled DB context factory, all right? Apart from that, the context per se is just a normal DB context, and I can modify the query that we've seen before in this way, right? In which I have, for example, my get all shares endpoint now, which is still shares as an endpoint, but this time it's returning an iQueryable of share, right? Which is using the DB set and the link to create a query that we can guess will be executed on the database side. Now, sometimes you might need to do a query which is not directly available in link to entities, perhaps using primitives that are not translatable from link to entities, or you need to run a store procedure. There are a few ways to achieve this, and we can perhaps talk about this during the Q&A session afterwards. For now, all that matters is that I can do Control F5. Hello, Max.
Yeah, I was hoping to ask something if you have time about. So this iQueryable interface, is it entity framework specific, or I can pass any iQueryable here?
No, it works with any iQueryable. So perhaps you could write your own iQueryable provider for querying your custom data source, for example. So let's assume that, for example, you have a I haven't personally tried it, but it would be interesting to see what would happen if this was actually an OData RESTful endpoint returning an iQueryable. It would be interesting to see how that would look like. But yeah, you can definitely write your own iQueryable implementation, and that will work with the Hot Chocolate.
Yeah, like in Inception, the sleep inside of the sleep. And why do you need to pass a parameter explicitly here? Because when we used IEnumerable, I didn't see any explicit where statement. Is it the difference for parameters specifically?
No. This is just something that I decided to do because perhaps I might want to apply some specific logic to that parameter. So I just wanted to show that you can either pass a parameter explicitly here in the query. Perhaps you need to go to a data set or a different data set depending on that parameter. So it's something that you can't easily translate in a link to entities query. So you have this option. Otherwise, you can just have a normal where condition that would be applied to your iQueryable interface here.
Oh, I see. So that's the extension point. Cool.
Exactly.
Thank you. Please
no
go
worries.
ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks to that, I was going to say, now the data. So the query has remained the same, but the data is coming from the database, and as you can see, it's filtered by the parameter that I've sent. And as we could expect, if we go and have a look at the SQL provider, let me just show the query. Yeah. So the query, the filter by the industry is happening obviously on the database side, right? So this is a so effectively, Hot Chocolate is integrating with the iQueryable version of EF, and it's making the call. It's making the filtering in SQL. Right. So far, we've only looked at GraphQL from the server-side point of view, right? So let's try to have a look at how this can be used in a client. And in order to do that, I need to go back to the slides one sec to introduce you to a framework called, another library called Strawberry Shake. Now, Strawberry Shake is the client from Chili Cream for GraphQL, and it's based on the concept of proxy generation, right? So the idea is that you will not need to write a query directly in text, right? It will generate a proxy class for you so that you can use in order to run your queries, right? There's a tool that you can install in the .NET CLI to do that, and it will basically start from a definition of the query that you can statically put in your application, and will generate this class that we're going to look at in a second, that contains all the objects that we might need in order to run our query. So in my case, I'm using a Blazor client, but obviously this works with any other C# client. So sorry. What have I done here? So first of all, I need the server to be in execution, and it's there. Fantastic. So all I need to do is opening PowerShell, a PowerShell screen, and obviously I need to install Strawberry Shake. I need to install the as a tool in the .NET CLI. But then at this point, I can just do something like this: .NET GraphQL init, and this is the endpoint of my server, right? As soon as I do this, if everything goes well, as you can see, the tool has already downloaded the schema of my service in my client here, and it has created this GraphQL setting file that will instruct the tool on how to generate my my client classes. I can customize these various options. So, for example, I can decide whether I want a single file or multiple files. I can specify, for example, the namespace where I want this to be created. So, for example, in my case, this is going to be the root namespace of my application, right? And after I've done this, all I need to do is adding a new text file, which I can call, for example, let me just switch to text. I can call typically something like, I don't know, queries.graphql. And as you can see, the tool is going to be looking for anything that has a GraphQL extension here, right? So queries.graphql is where I'm going to go and write my my queries. So, for example, I can use this query here, which is the same I was using in the browser a few moments ago, right? Now, this file is going to be processed by an MS Build extension, an analyzer, sorry, that it's referenced here in the client-side project, right? Strawberry Shake Code Generation C# Analyzer. And this means that I need to make sure that this is sent to MS Build. So let me just specify this custom tool, and build action is a C# Analyzer. So if I've done all these steps correctly, the moment I go and build my client-side project, what I should get, yeah, here it is. It's a generated class like this one, which is basically my entry point towards GraphQL. Yeah, it's just a nasty class that we don't even want to look at. But what we can do is going now to my program and configure the IOC container to register, for example, a shares client. This is an extension method that has been auto-generated right now. And I'm configuring it to hit the HTTP endpoint of my server-side hot chocolate project, right? Once I've done this, I can go to my fetch data page, for example. Let me just clean up everything here. I can say inject iShares client. Let's call it shares client. I can add some markup to the page to show the list of shares. And here in the code, I can have a collection of iShare object, which I can fetch with this method that has been auto-generated for my client. As you can see, get shares here is the same name as the query that I've defined here. All right. So if I've done everything correctly, and now try to let me just set the startup projects to be both projects now. Yeah, and let me make sure that I can refresh everything. Do Control F5. And the application will hopefully build, and I should be able to query from Blazor my server-side endpoint. All right. So this is the most basic example that I had prepared for you today, but there are a few other examples that I have in the solution that you can clone from GitHub. For example, let me just relaunch the application once again. In this other version, I've added things such as, so apart from just having fetch data, I've added, for example, a pagination example, right, with a virtualized object. So as you can see right now, I'm scrolling the page, and as soon as I scroll it, the virtualizer is fetching the other elements pretty much on the fly, right? And this is implemented via, in this page here, fetch data pages. There's this virtualize, and I'm calling a get shares async method that applies the pagination as expected. Same, the query is exactly the same as before. The other interesting thing that I wanted to show you is an example of filtering, right? In which I can perhaps filter by the industry ID, right? But the way I've implemented this is with a generic where condition, right? So there's a where condition, which is of type share filter input. Where is this share filter input coming from? It's the name of the object that GraphQL has, hot chocolate has automatically created to model my possible where conditions here, right? And in this fetch data filter page, what I'm doing is that based on the selected value on the dropdown, I'm creating an instance of this share filter input, where I'm saying I want to create a filter by industry, by the ID field of the industry, and this the condition is going to be equals to my value. Okay, so this obviously is very flexible. You can create whichever where conditions you want just by manipulating this this object model, and then eventually I'm just passing that object here as a where parameter to my proxy. All right, cool. So We've achieved a lot so far, but the problem is that at the moment we're just querying, all right? And we could pretty much do the same things with our data. So let's start talking about modifying the data. And an action that modifies the data in GraphQL is called mutation. I have a branch to demonstrate mutations here. And let me just close everything because I want to first of all show you how this concept, which is relatively new, is is gracefully integrated in the rest of the framework, right? So let's go to the server side first, right? And in the server side, in the startup class, now I just had to add a mutation type like this one, right? What's a mutation? In C#, it's basically just another class pretty similar to the query that we had created before that has a name, change value async. I could change this name for the mutation just by using an attribute. And this mutation is accepting a payload like this one, change value input, right? Which is just a record with ID and percentage of a change. And internally, it's just rolling out that change to the database. So it's fetching the share, applying the new value, and saving it. And it's returning a payload, which is just the share that we've modified. Okay, cool. How do we? So let's relaunch the application and play with this mutation from the playground. So the interesting thing is that I can at any time go here on the playground and start playing with it. As you can see now, the mutation is available in the schema of my GraphQL endpoint, and it's all perfect type safe. And I can write a query similar to this one, right? Mutation, change value. This is the name of the mutation I want to execute. These are the parameters of my mutation. Obviously, you can add validations to these things. There are several project libraries that you can reference to that are available for any type of validation. And then I'm just returning the same fragment, share fragment that we've seen before, right? Yeah, run it. And yeah, as you can see, this is the number here is changing. So it's effectively modifying the data in my database, okay? Right. From the point of view of a Blazor, should we want to add a mutation on the client? Also here, it's all very natural. So I just need to add the same query on my queries.graphql file. The moment I do that, the proxy generator will generate a method to invoke this mutation. All right. How does this method look like? Well, here my fetch data, for example, I have a button in this version I can click. Let me quickly show you this. I will need probably to close this and relaunch it. Right, fetch data. I have this button I can click to apply mutation. I spent probably half a day to do this CSS effect. I'm really I'm really not that great with CSS, but you get the point. So this is actually applying the mutation on that share on the database. And from the code point of view, all I'm doing is just again calling another method, right? Shares client. This is the method that has been generated, which is the method that corresponds to my mutation, and these are just the parameters that I can send. All right. Cool. All right, so the next thing I wanted to show you is where I think the impact of GraphQL on what we can put in our applications, the functionalities we can create, is really showing how powerful this language is. And I'm going to talk about subscriptions. So far, what we've seen is something that it doesn't sound new. Okay, the iQueryable support is nice, but we've seen it in OData before. Even RIA services, for those of you who have more than 10 years of career, were providing something like this in the past. But the moment that we, for example, want to start notifying the client from the server side of a data being changed or sending messages, it's not something that we can't do, but this is where the RESTful paradigm, I mean, it's just not enough anymore, right? So we need to start integrating with additional libraries like, I don't know, SignalR, for example, on the server. We need a client for SignalR, or we need to send messages using the raw WebSocket protocol from the server to the client. So REST is not does not provide that capability out of the box. And instead, this capability is provided by GraphQL thanks to the concept of subscriptions, right? So a subscription, let me just close this for now. From the point of view from the server side, is not any different than anything that we have created before, right? So there's this object shares a subscription in which I have specified that, yeah, there's with the attribute subscribe, I'm saying that this is something you can subscribe to, on share value changed async. I can assign a name to the topic where this subscription is published, right? And these are the parameters of my subscription. So there's this event message. This is the parameter that I'm going to use in order to raise this notification, this event on this topic, right? And in this case, the subscription per se will return a payload, which is the share that has changed, right? How do I raise this subscription from my server-side logic? Well, for example, here in the mutation, right, I have, so this is the mutation we were playing with before. I'm injecting another service called iTopic event sender, right? And this service will allow me to basically call this send async, specify the name of the topic where I want to send this message, and I will get the and I will pass also the parameter that I want to invoke this topic with, right? Apart from that, so I feel that this is all, again, very, very integrated. I don't have to deal with, I don't know, a hub context like I would do with SignalR, right? So it's all pretty much the same stuff, right? The same, slightly different flavors of very similar pieces of code. In the startup class, I just needed to configure this subscription pretty much like I did with the shares, and I needed to configure a provider for that the server is going to use to keep track of all the connected clients, right? So, for example, here I'm using an in-memory provider, which works well when I have a single instance of the server. Sometimes I might have I don't know, multiple servers. So, for example, 10 different instances of an app service. In that case, there is a Redis provider that we can use for that purpose. And apart from that, I just need to configure the WebSockets here, in this way. So I'm just opening the WebSockets on the server, and I'm whitelisting in the course the two endpoints that I'm going to use as soon as to demonstrate you this feature, right? Apart from that, there's really nothing different. Max, I heard you that you wanted to chip in, probably. I kind of heard the click.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just adjusting my microphone right now.
Okay, sorry about that then.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, so let's see this. Let's see this in action. Let me just again close out the previous instances. Control F5, and as usual, the first step will be playing with this on the playground, right? So let's let me close a bunch of these tabs, which are now going to be too many, and let's close everything here. And yeah, a subscription, like I was saying, is just another query that I can run like this. If I go and have a look at the schema reference, as you can see now, there's a subscription available here with the signature that I've specified in C#. This has been automatically used to populate the schema, right? And I can run it in this way, right? Subscription on share value changed. This will return me a share object. I can select the properties that I want to see of that share object, right? Let's try to click run and let's see what happens. So as you can see, now this is never returning, right? So this is simply the client, which is listening for any messages defined here on which will arrive in the channel that it has just opened with the server, right? We can also have a look at this from the network inspector, right? I mean, I will need to refresh this screen. As you can see, as soon as I hit run, there is a WebSocket channel being opened with the server, right, with the right payload, and this is listening to this subscription here on share value changed, right? And at this point, I can perhaps let me just close this one sec. I can duplicate this tab, and let me just try to make a change to a share, right? So if I hit run here in the mutation, as you can see, I make a change, and the change is being forwarded to the subscribing client as well. All right. Cool. Let me close this now, and let's go back to Visual Studio. Now, sometimes I might not be interested in subscribing to the entire set of events. For example, I don't want to receive a notification for all the possible shares that can have a change in value. It's possible to define subscriptions with parameters as well. So in this example here, I've created a second type of subscription called on share value changed by industry, right? In this case, I'm basically adding a parameter here called industry. This is going to be my topic name, right? So there will be a different topic per industry, right? And the payload will be exactly the same, but the only difference is that now in my mutation code, when I make any change on a share, I'm going to raise two events, right? One in the generic channel, and one here in the topic in the industry specific topic for that change. And this is obviously going to be reflected on the schema, right? Now I have two shares of subscription, one for on share value changed and one for on share value changed by industry. I can subscribe to only a specific industry. For example, here it's transportation, right? If I hit run, I have my WebSocket now waiting for a message there. And if I now, again, do the same experiment as before, and try to run a mutation. This change, as you can see, has not raised any notifications here because it's on a different industry. It's not the one where which I'm monitoring. This is consumer non-durables. The moment I do, for example, the same change to something which is in transportation, here I see the change appearing on my client. Okay, so this is, I think, a really useful. And just to be clear, when I'm on a different, I'm on a different industry. In this case, the channel, the WebSocket is not receiving not even the message. So it's not a filter that is happening on the client side. It's just that GraphQL is not sending the message to the channel for the transportation industry, right? So this is useful when you don't want to overwhelm your clients with messages that they don't care about.
Hey, so yeah. Am I right that it's possible to set up the subscriptions in a way that if I had a data grid on the UI, I can only update it when I need it. Let's say I have a lot of filters associated with the data grid, and I can set up the subscription to be aligned with these filters on the UI, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It would be so. The filtering is done through the concept of topic name, right? So every different topic is a different channel, basically, right? Doing something that is corresponding to exactly the set of filters that you have, it's possible. It requires perhaps a bit of a plumbing in your code, but the concept here is that my subscription, my parametric subscription here, it's not registered on a single topic like the first one, right? But it's registered on potentially different topic names depending on this parameter, right? And the link with how only that industry gets notified to the client is because when I raise the event here on the mutation, I'm sending that event only to the topic name, I don't know, transportation, for example, not to a generic topic name. All right, does it answer your question?
Yeah, it might be a little bit more complicated to implement it in a generic form, like for all kinds of data grids and all kinds of filters, but it looks like it's totally possible. And it is interesting how it's integrated in the GraphQL concept. So you don't have to develop your architecture. You already have one. You just need to plug into this architecture. That's good.
Exactly. And again, I am stressing on this, but what I really fell in love with is how this concept, even though we know that technically under the hood is completely different than everything else we've been doing so far, right? But because it's using WebSockets, it's a full double-less communication between client and server, etc. But I mean, from the coding perspective, it just looks so nicely integrated with the rest of the other code that we've written, and this is, I think, something which is really, really valuable. Cool. Let's have a look at how we can work with subscriptions from the client side, for example. And guess what? All we had to do is adding the subscriptions here on the queries.graphql file that we've been modifying since the beginning of the talk, right? I need to add another couple of libraries here, like support for WebSockets, and since the client, the proxy code is based on system.reactive, I had to add this package as well. But apart from that, there are really, really minimal changes. So in the program.cs file, now I'm registering two endpoints, right? One for HTTP and one for WebSocket, as we would expect. And let's have a look at the fetch data page. So when I load the fetch data page, what I'm doing is that in the onInitializeSync method, I'm creating this session object here. Session is an idisposable object that gets returned when I do onShareValueChange. This is the name of my subscription, .watch, right? And then I can subscribe to any messages being sent to this channel here. And once that message is received, I just go and execute this replace a share by ID, replace share with by ID. And that's really it. And here I have my Blazor logic to replace the value of that share on the client side. So let's go and have a look at this. Right. So control. Oh, just one thing. I say that this is idisposable. This is because the channel will be kept open until we dispose it. Right. So it's important that now also my component here. This is more for those of you who are doing any Blazor development. Is implementing the idisposable interface so that in the dispose method here, I can just dispose also the session that I've created, right? So let's launch this and see if it works. So again, Control F5, Blazor client. I will need now. This is going to be tricky with such a big window. and such as more resolution. So bear with me. So let's go to the network tab, WebSocket, and go to fetch data. So as you can see, also in Blazor, I have my WebSocket channel opened with the server. Right now, let's duplicate this. Let's duplicate the tab, and let's go here and start making changes. If I click change here, as you can see, there's a message being sent to Blazor, and I see the notification being triggering the logic that I've implemented also on this fetch data page. I've also created, guys, an example for you of a parametric subscription on the client side as well. So, for example, do you remember this fetch data by filtering here? So let's have a quick look at the code first, and then we will see it in action. So this fetch data filter page also supports a subscription. But if I'm filtering for transportation, I don't want to receive messages for all the other industries, right? So what I'm doing here is that when I load the data, right, based on the selected value on that dropdown, I'm creating a subscription either towards the generic subscription channel, which will send me any notification. This is only if I haven't selected anything, right? Or to an industry-specific channel in this case. And please note that I'm always disposing the previous existing session, right? Because otherwise, again, I would have a set of connections stacking up one after the other, and will end up receiving duplicate messages. So again, it's super important to remember to dispose the sessions. But this is to say that now, if I let me just reload this page to clean up the thing here. If we look and just need to grab this should be the one, right? So right now this is subscribing to on share value changed. If I switch to transportation, as you can see, it has stopped the previous subscription, and it's starting a new one of type on share value changed. On share value changed by industry, right? So this is only subscribing to the right industry, to the transportation industry. So if I now go and make a change to something else, as you can see, there are no events being raised here. I can't see anything changing here. Bear with me. I know that it's not really that useful, but the only thing that is running is the heartbeat, right? But the moment I make a change to this one, as you can see, I get a payload with the share that has changed, which is this one. Okay, so and I still have some bugs on this CSS thing, but the notifications are working well. You will never hire someone like me for your CSS, but at least the functionality, the functionality under the hood will work. All right, cool, guys. So these are the subscriptions. How much we have? Well, we have another few minutes. So I wanted to show you another couple of cool features of GraphQL. And in order to do that, I need to go back to the slides one sec. So I guess that many of you are building microservices architecture, right? And I wanted to also show you how this entire framework plays really nicely with such an architecture. So let's assume that we have a system like this one, in which I have the shares microservice, and then perhaps I have a separate microservice that contains that manages investors, for example. And on the top stack, I have my clients, either my Blazor client, for example, or my GraphQL playground, right? So from the point of view of GraphQL, you can handle one of the ways to handle an architecture like this is by creating a gateway service between these two stacks, right? The gateway is going to be exposing a unified schema, right? So it contains a schema which is a merge of all the schemas published by the individual microservices. But from the point of view of the client, it's going to act like a sort of a facade over these services. So the individual clients will never know that actually when they make a call for the shares, they're actually reaching a different service than the one that is responsible of the investors. Okay. How does it work in hot chocolate? Well, as usual, I have a branch for this. It's called stitching, right? This is a solution which is slightly different, right? So this project here is our friend we've been working with throughout the talk. But I also created this investors server here, in which I have an investor which is like this: ID, name, industry ID, etc. And I have a query like this one. Okay, so I'm returning an investor object with these properties. And then I created another service called Gateway here. And this service is configuring two HTTP clients, right? One for my shares and one for my investors services. And it's configuring the GraphQL service in this way. So I'm saying add remote schema, shares and investors. All right. Now let's launch this one sec and see. Let's see what we can achieve with just those few lines of code, the lines of configuration. So let me launch everything. So everything is starting up. My facade should be, this is the endpoint / GraphQL. I promise you, this is going to be really cool. Now, as you can see, I have my schema in which I have the industries. So these are the queries that we've been playing with before, but I also have this query of investors, right? And in this investors query, look at that. I don't only have industry ID, right? But I have a full-blown industry object, right? Which I can query, right? So look at this query: investors name and also the industry name. And as you can see, the server is a facade service, is resolving this navigation property for me, right? How is that possible? It's basically possible because I've defined what is called as a type extension, right? So this is really cool. I'm saying extend the investor type, which only has the industry ID, with another property called industry, right? And this property is of type industry, and you can fetch it from the shares schema, right? By this query here, industry by ID, and you need to query this, execute this query passing the industry ID field of the original investor object. So that this is how this is automatically resolving this link here, right? And the client doesn't know really anything about it. Now, time is really running up. Just one last thing I wanted to, I think it's worth showing. So unfortunately, this setup suffers from the N+1 problem, right? So what's happening is that under the hood, obviously, we have these 3 industry IDs that we need to resolve, right? And this will generate what is called a batch query in GraphQL, right? So a single query towards the shares service to retrieve the industry by IDs. Since we don't support any batching on our service, this is actually running 3 different queries against the database. And we can clearly see this here on the queries, in which I have one query for industry where ID equals to 1, another query for industry equals to 2, and so on and so forth. Max, I kind of heard you.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just interested in if it's possible to resolve n+1 issue here, and because the syntax itself makes sense to me, but without the ability to get rid of it, just little we can do with this kind of syntax.
Absolutely, because you don't want to go to production with an issue like this one. Yeah, there's definitely a solution for this, which is called the batch data loader. So all we need to do is basically supporting this batch query in a more clever way. I have a branch here. Again, that solves that problem. If it was all that easy, like just switching branches, that would be amazing. And we would probably be all unoccupied. So what I've done here is let me show you the previous version of this. One sec. Right. So shares query. I have my get industry by ID query. Right. This is the one that the gateway is calling to resolve my industry. Right. And this, as you can see, just goes straight to the database and retrieves the industry, generating the n+1 problem on the database side. We can change it with something like, which is slightly more complex, like this one. Right here, let me just add a few usings. What I'm doing is injecting this iResolver context in the as a service in this call. And this iResolver context exposes a batch data loader object, right? The output of this batch data loader must be a dictionary of int and industry. So I can register a delegate here, which will receive a list, an array of integer, int, right, based on this. And I can use it to make a slightly different query on the database, right, this time. So I'm not going where x.id equals to id, but I'm doing this IDs contains, right? And I'm returning this dictionary I was mentioning before. Then, so this is the callback for the batch data loader. But then I'm just doing a load async ID token. Now the good thing is that this code will only be run once per batch, right? So when I execute this batch, that delegate will be called. It will retrieve all the entities in one go, and then it will the load async method will just assign the proper response to each of these queries. So in a nutshell, guys, what's happening is that, let me just close all these console apps. What's happening is that if we try to run the same example again, and I need to go, it's tricky, to my banana box, which is here. I run this, and yeah, I have the same response, but this time if I go and have a look at the query, it's something like this, which is way more optimized than it was before.
So
all right?
This is a specific convention, right? If I need to extend my type using a delegate, I can write my own batch loader so that GraphQL can understand how to load the data generically in a batch. And when I need to implement, let's say, a quick demo, I can just ignore it. Who cares when you have only 5 rows in your database, and then I can optimize it, right?
Exactly, absolutely. Guys, I think that the time is up. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay. Yeah, so we are running out of time.
Yeah, sorry about that, but I think that was really cool to not show it. So brief recap of what we've seen. We've done quite a journey, I think, on the GraphQL world with hot chocolate and strawberry shake. So we've seen how to connect to spin up a server on ASP.NET Core, how to connect the client. We've seen mutations, subscriptions with parameters, schema stitching, batch loader. So there's really a lot of stuff. Feel free to go and download the code from my GitHub repository and get in touch either during the Q&A later on or on Twitter or by email. I'm really happy to interact with all of you guys. And thanks a lot. I hope you enjoyed the talk.
Yeah, and thank you too, Marco. Let's go to the discussion zone. We have plenty of time there.
All right, fantastic. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.